The 6:10 coach from Lincoln rolled into Flaxborough 10 minutes late, its headlights sliding over wet cobblestones that glistened like fish scales. A few passengers stepped down, blinking against the drizzle. Mrs. Clara Viblock, wrapped in her knitted shawl of civic righteousness, announced to no one and everyone, late again. Standards slipping dreadful. In Flaxborough, that was sufficient to become news. Among the arrivals was a young woman in a red duffel coat, carrying a small overnight bag. She paused beneath the gas lamp, scanning the quiet market square with the expectant anxiety of someone uncertain they'd be met. The coach rumbled away. She hesitated, then crossed toward the road that led to the river. Mrs. Viblock noted this. "Not one of ours," she murmured, which in Flaxborough was less an observation than a warning. By morning, the gossip had fermented. In the Market Arms tea lounge, Miss Lucy Treadgold insisted the girl was seen behind the co-op. Mr. Parmenter swore she'd gone to the river path. Both accounts soon gained the permanence of scripture. Sergeant Malley brought the matter to Inspector Purbright's desk. Name's Enid Sharp, sir. 22. Typist at the electricity board. Lodging in Wolsey Street. Landlady says she never came home last night. Purbright, whose expression seldom revealed more than polite interest, folded his hands. In Flaxborough, Sergeant, young women generally reappear after breakfast. Still, best to ask a few questions before the town council forms a committee. Mrs. Blennerhassett, the landlady, received them with a face arranged for tragedy. She was a quiet girl, too quiet perhaps. Ate in her room, no gentleman callers. Last night she said she was meeting a friend off the coach. Looked flustered. In the girls' tidy room they found gloves, a half-written letter, and a faint perfume of something inexpensive but hopeful. Purbright read the letter's first line. "Dear Mr. P, I think it best we do not see each other for a while." He raised a brow. "A delicate situation, Sergeant." Possibly romantic, possibly administrative. By afternoon, rumour had eclipsed reason. At the hairdresser's, Enid had eloped. At the post office, she'd been murdered. At the council chamber, Councillor Cribben suggested a firmer moral tone for the town. Purbright listened to each version with mild amusement. "Cribben confuses virtue with public speaking," he remarked. "Still, let's find the friend she meant to meet." That evening, a nervous curate, Reverend Lummis, presented himself at the station. I may have been the last to see her. Outside the library just after 6. She was crying, said she'd been foolish and needed to meet someone to make it right. She carried a brown paper parcel, tied with string. Purbright thanked him gently. "If memory improves overnight, do let us know before the Gazette does." When Lummis had gone, Malley said, "Could be blackmail, sir." Purbright watched the fog creeping against the window panes. "Or sentiment mislaid. Either way, Sergeant, have Constable Hale walk the river path at dawn, quietly, and tell Mrs. Blennerhassett to bolt her door. It will comfort her to believe bolts deter whatever she fears." Outside, the lamps glowed in the mist, and somewhere beyond them a girl in a red coat had vanished between one heartbeat and the next, leaving Flaxborough to its favourite pastime, wondering and pretending not to. By the next morning, Flaxborough had achieved what it did best, transforming uncertainty into entertainment. The disappearance of Enid Sharp no longer belonged to the police. It belonged to the town. At the hairdresser's, Mrs. Holly said she'd always suspected the electricity board girls were flighty. At the bakery, old Mr. Biggins declared she'd been taken for a ride, literally. By noon she had been seen in 3 pubs, eloping with 2 different men, and murdered twice, once by drowning, once with a carving knife. Inspector Purbright, meanwhile, sat behind his desk reading the morning paper's report. Local girl missing. Police make inquiries. It was admirably vague. Sergeant Malley entered carrying 2 cups of tea. Sir Mrs. Blennerhassett's had reporters at her door. "She's near hysterical," Purbright sipped calmly. "She'll recover once she's told her story 3 times. After that, she'll begin to enjoy it." He sent Malley to the electricity board to learn about Miss Sharp's habits. The staff, grateful for novelty, offered details in abundance. She was punctual, polite, perhaps lonely. One young clerk recalled a man waiting for her outside one evening, a respectable sort in a grey coat.
"Could have been anyone," he said.
Except no one's seen him since. That afternoon, Purbright walked through the market square where conversations fell to murmurs at his passing. People wanted to appear helpful but not involved, curious but innocent. He stopped at the post office where Miss Treadgold, now temporarily in charge, fluttered with significance. "She used to send letters often," she said. "Same handwriting, always to some Lincoln address. But last week she asked for a different envelope, blue one, foreign style." Looked nervous. Purbright thanked her, pocketing the remark like a seed to be planted later. Outside, a drizzle began, the sort that made Flaxborough smell faintly of cabbage and old paint. He noticed Councillor Cribben approaching, puffed with civic indignation. "Inspector," Cribben said, "the council expects decisive progress. The ratepayers are anxious." Purbright regarded him kindly. "Then perhaps they might occupy themselves by not discussing it quite so loudly." As dusk settled, he returned to the station where Mally waited with a notebook. "No sign of her on the river path, sir." But Constable Hale found this caught in the reeds. He laid down a scrap of brown paper, damp but intact, with a bit of string still knotted to it. Purbright examined it silently.
"A parcel without contents," he said at last.
"Flaxborough does love symbolism," Mally hesitated. "Do you think she's in the water?" Purbright looked toward the window where the lamps blurred in the rain. "Not yet, Sergeant. For now she's simply missing, which is something the town understands far better than tragedy. They'll keep her alive in rumour until we find the truth." He leaned back, eyes distant but alert. "Tomorrow we'll begin again, quietly, before the town writes the ending for us." Outside, the church clock struck 8, and somewhere in the warren of lanes and gossip, the story of the girl in the red coat continued to grow, rooting itself deeper into the polite soil of Flaxborough, where every whisper felt like evidence, and every kindness hid a clue. The next morning arrived pale and raw, the kind of grey that made even respectable curtains seem conspiratorial. Inspector Purbright began his day, as always, with a quiet inspection of the town through his office window. The square was half awake, milk van parked askew, pigeons dignified as bishops, and Mrs. Viblock already surveying the world with suspicion. "The town appears healthy enough," he murmured, "which is always when the fever's worst." Sergeant Mally entered with a list of names. "Electricity board staff, the curate, and 2 neighbours, sir."
"I thought we'd start with the landlady again." Purbright nodded.
People often improve their stories after a night's sleep, sometimes with imagination, sometimes with guilt. Mrs. Blennerhassett opened the door before they knocked, face powdered with exhaustion and satisfaction.
"Oh, Inspector."
"Reporters again this morning?" "I told them nothing, of course, except that she was a quiet girl, and I'd warned her against late walks. Between us, I don't believe it was robbery. No decent thief would bother with a typist." Purbright inclined his head. "Quite. May I ask, did Miss Sharp ever receive visitors?" The landlady hesitated. Only the postman, and even he looked embarrassed. Once she had a parcel, small about the size of a book. I remember because she hid it quickly when I came in." Purbright smiled faintly.
"And this was how long before she vanished?"
2 days, Inspector. She seemed lighter after that, like someone who'd just posted a confession. At the electricity board, the office girls proved eager collaborators. One remembered Enid's fondness for crossword puzzles. Another whispered that she was seeing someone important. The supervisor, a bony woman named Miss Crutchley, supplied firmness. She was reliable, Inspector, but recently distracted. Once I caught her using the office phone for a personal call. Very unlike her, Purbright thanked them all, listening more to tone than words. People in Flaxborough revealed themselves most clearly when they thought they were concealing something else. In the afternoon, he and Mally called upon Reverend Lummis again. The curate looked paler than before, his collar slightly askew. "I've remembered something," he confessed. "When I saw Miss Sharp outside the library, She said the parcel was for someone she'd promised to help, someone she pitied.
I didn't ask who,
She was upset, almost frightened. Did she mention a name?
asked Purbright. No.
But she said, he wouldn't understand if I just stopped writing. That's all. As they left the vicarage, Mally muttered, "Could be an affair." Purbright nodded absently. Or an act of charity badly chosen. The two are often confused. Back at the station, he spread his notes neatly across the desk. A parcel, a letter to Mr. P, a girl afraid, yet dutiful. Threads of sentiment, not violence. He tapped his pencil once. "Sergeant, tomorrow I'd like to visit the post office records. See if Miss Sharp sent any registered parcels recently."
Mally grinned.
"You think the parcel's the key?" "I think," Purbright said, closing the file, "that people who disappear often leave behind one small thing they didn't mean to. And Flaxborough, bless it, will talk loudly enough to tell us what that thing is." Outside, the lamps flickered to life again, catching the mist in a soft amber haze. The town was still talking, only now it had begun to wonder not what had happened to Enid Sharp, but why. And that, Purbright knew, was when truth usually began to stir. By Thursday morning, the collective patience of Flaxborough had expired. The mystery of Enid Sharp's disappearance had matured from curiosity into civic irritation. People wanted resolution, preferably one that could be comfortably disapproved of over breakfast. When Councillor Cribben stopped by the station with his solemn air of public duty, Purbright recognised the moment had come. The townsfolk, Cribben declared, need reassurance that their police are not idly sipping tea while young women vanish. Purbright smiled pleasantly. "We sip while thinking, Councillor. It's more efficient that way." Cribben's visit, though brief, left behind its residue of urgency. Within hours, Sergeant Mally had been approached by no fewer than 3 citizens offering useful information. The most persuasive was Mrs. Viblock, who claimed she had seen that butcher fellow Parmenter loitering near the river path on the very night of the girl's disappearance. He had a parcel, she said, and looked guilty. But then he always does. By mid-afternoon, the story had ripened. Now Parmenter had been overheard arguing with the girl, his apron spotted with something dark. Purbright found the butcher in his shop, arranging lamb chops with the precision of a surgeon. "Evening, Inspector," Parmenter said evenly. "If this is about the gossip, you'd best take a number. Half the town's been in asking if I've confessed yet." Purbright regarded him mildly. "I'm afraid gossip travels faster than our inquiries. You were seen near the river Tuesday evening?" "I was delivering a joint to the vicarage. Walked back that way to save time. Must have been around 6:30.
Didn't see any girl." His eyes flicked up briefly.
"Except Mrs. Viblock, hiding behind a lamp-post as usual." At the station, Mally seemed hopeful. "Motive means an opportunity, sir."
Could have met her. Argument, accident maybe. Purbright's expression didn't change.
"A man who spends his days cutting meat does not usually choose the river for further practice. Still, let's not spoil the town's fun too soon." That evening, a quiet satisfaction settled over Flaxborough. It was comforting to have a culprit, someone familiar enough to despise, but harmless enough to leave the children unafraid. In the Market Arms, men nodded gravely over their pints. In the post office, Miss Treadgold whispered that the police were closing in. The only person not reassured was Purbright. He reread his notes late into the night. The parcel found in the reeds was too small for anything sinister and too dry for anything recent. The letter to Mr. P suggested distress, not violence, and there was still that blue foreign-style envelope the postmistress had mentioned. He underlined the word foreign twice, as though it might change its meaning. Before leaving, he walked to the window where fog pressed like breath against the glass. The town lay muffled, decent, asleep, believing its mystery solved. Purbright murmured to himself. "Convenience, Sergeant, is the enemy of truth. Tomorrow we shall see whether our butcher's guilt fits better than his apron." He switched off the light. leaving the office in darkness except for the faint gleam of the river beyond, winding patiently through Flaxborough, quiet, opaque, and not nearly finished with its secret. The following morning brought with it a thin sunlight and the faint, embarrassed quiet that settles on a town after too much confident gossip. The butcher's shop had reopened, Parmenter slicing bacon with exaggerated serenity, while his customers whispered their apologies in tones meant to sound like praise. Inspector Purbright, watching through the window of his office, thought how swiftly Flaxborough could excommunicate and then canonize a man in the same week. "We shall give them a fresh subject," he murmured, turning back to the desk where Sergeant Malley waited, holding an envelope delicately between two fingers. "Post office records came through, sir. There was a parcel sent from Miss Sharp 3 days before she vanished. No return address, but here's something else. This letter. It wasn't posted." The envelope was cream, unsealed, and bore a 1-penny stamp, the wrong denomination for inland mail. Purbright slid out the folded sheet inside. "Dear Mr. P," it began, "I can't keep your letters any longer."
I know you mean well, but it isn't right.
"You said you wanted to help, but it feels like something else. Please understand I must end this." The rest trailed off mid-sentence, the ink faintly blurred as if touched by a tear or a finger reconsidering. Malley leaned forward.
"Mr. P again."
"Could be Parmenter." "Could be, Sergeant," Purbright replied mildly. "Or could be anyone who begins with the 16th letter of the alphabet. The postmistress mentioned a blue envelope, foreign style. This one's wrong in a very local way." He held it to the light.
"Our girl didn't mean to send it."
"She meant to hide it." At midday, Purbright walked to the electricity board, the letter folded neatly in his pocket. Miss Crutchley met him with her habitual air of administrative purity. "If you've come about Mr. Parmenter, Inspector, I never trusted that man." "I'm sure he'd return the sentiment," Purbright said pleasantly. "But no, Miss Sharp's desk, if you please." He examined the tidy drawers, invoices, postcards, and a single half-burnt envelope tucked behind the stationery tray. The handwriting matched the unsent letter, but this one bore a Lincoln address and was marked "Returned, no longer, at this address." Outside in the cold square, Purbright paused, considering the symmetry. One letter written but not sent, another sent but never received. "A conversation," he murmured, "carried entirely by silence." Back at the station, Malley waited expectantly. "Find anything useful?" "Only confirmation that our Mr. P isn't a butcher," Purbright replied. "More likely, a gentleman who changed his address before his conscience could catch up. Perhaps even one of those helpful souls who mistake loneliness for opportunity." He laid both envelopes side by side on the desk. "Look at the stamps, Sergeant. Wrong denomination on one, foreign on the other. Someone was pretending to write abroad, but not quite convincingly. Flaxborough never does foreign convincingly," Malley frowned. "So she lied about where she was writing, or where she was being written from." Purbright's tone softened. "Either way, the story told itself too soon. People who vanish seldom do so for strangers. They do it for someone familiar." The clock struck 5, and the thin light drained from the frosted windows. Purbright gathered the papers into a folder, his movements calm but deliberate. "Tomorrow we'll visit the library. I suspect our missing girl borrowed more than books." He switched off the lamp. The room fell into a comfortable half-dark, filled only by the steady tick of the clock, steady, methodical. Like the man himself, while beyond the station, the quiet streets of Flaxborough waited for the next whisper to begin. The next day dawned damp and dull, as if the weather itself had grown suspicious. Inspector Purbright began his morning with a visit to the library, where Miss Crutchley, the librarian, possessed the rare gift of making curiosity seem like civic duty. "Miss Sharp?" she said, after a long pause intended to suggest memory's moral weight.
"Yes, she came often."
"Biographies mostly, and some foreign correspondence manuals, very modern, all about writing to strangers abroad."
I remember because she returned one late and apologized as though she'd broken a commandment. Purbright listened, noting the detail without comment.
Did she ever meet anyone here? He asked.
Not that I saw, said Miss Cratchley, but people meet in silences, don't they? Especially the quiet ones. Back at the station, Sergeant Malley looked up from his typewriter. The letter traces came back. The Lincoln address belonged to a Mr. Philip Renard, used to run the travel agency on High Street. Moved to Leeds 3 months ago.
Bit of a reputation, apparently. Purbright smiled faintly.
Ah, Mr. P at last.
A man who sells journeys and one young woman who took him literally. By afternoon, the inspector paid a call to Mrs. Blennerhassett again. The landlady's parlour smelled of lavender polish and gilt. She fluttered with new information. I did remember something, Inspector. Miss Sharp once had a visitor, a woman.
Elegant, older, not local.
They talked in low voices for nearly an hour.
Afterwards, Enid looked pale. I thought it was family trouble. Did she leave anything behind?
Purbright asked. A handkerchief, perhaps. Lace edge. I washed it and kept it. Thought it might be useful some day. She fetched it from a drawer with a flourish. The monogram stitched into the corner read, M.R. Purbright examined it, nodding slightly. A useful habit, Mrs. Blennerhassett, washing away evidence before the police can dirty it further. Outside, dusk settled early. The inspector walked slowly through the narrow streets where curtains already twitched against the lamplight. Behind them lived a collection of decencies, each guarding its own small secret. There was Mrs. Bundle, who had stopped speaking to her sister over a borrowed teapot. The vicar's wife, who wrote unsigned letters to the council about the colour of shop blinds. And now, perhaps, someone who knew why a young typist had feared the contents of a parcel she'd wrapped herself. When Purbright reached the vicarage, Reverend Lummis met him with eyes red from worry or confession. Inspector, I've remembered more. The woman Enid was meeting, she mentioned her once, said she was helping her get away from something. A mistake, she called it? Purbright nodded thoughtfully. Mistakes, Reverend, are rarely solitary. They prefer company. Returning to the station, he found Malley waiting, excitement flickering in his usually stolid face. Sir, Mrs. Renard's just come in. Says she wants to clear her conscience. The woman who entered was indeed elegant, her gloved hands trembling with the effort of self-control. My husband wrote to that girl, she began, before Purbright could speak. He met her through some nonsense club, pen friends for lonely hearts. When he moved away, he said it was over, but she kept writing. Then she came to see me, said she'd return his letters if I met her.
I thought she only wanted money. Did you give her any? Asked Purbright gently. No, I
lost my temper. Told her to stop or I'd speak to the police. She said I wouldn't need to. That I'd soon have nothing to worry about. Mrs. Renard's voice faltered. And then I left her there by the river path. Purbright's face remained unreadable.
And you told no one?
She was alive when I left.
I swear it. He regarded her for a moment, then said quietly, The truth, Mrs. Renard, is rarely the most convenient form of respectability.
But it does last longer. When she had gone, Malley exhaled.
So that's it then?
Purbright looked toward the misted window where the lamps glowed faintly. No, Sergeant. That's just the view from one curtain. There are several more to draw before we see the whole room. The following dawn brought the kind of chill that clung to bone and thought alike. Constable Hale, trudging along the river path with his collar turned up, noticed something pale snagged against a half-submerged branch. At first, he mistook it for a drowned dog, but the shape was wrong, too delicate, too human in suggestion. When he drew nearer, he saw a woman's shoe, the strap broken, its leather swollen from water. He fished it out with the caution of a man retrieving not evidence, but gossip waiting to happen. By mid-morning, the discovery had travelled faster than the constable. At the police station, Sergeant Malley laid the shoe on Purbright's desk, as though it might still bite. Found by the bend near the bridge, sir. Looks expensive. Size 5. Purbright examined it without touching. Miss Sharp's?
Landlady says she owns something similar. Malley's tone hinted at triumph. Purbright regarded the shoe thoughtfully. Similar is the foundation of all good rumour, Sergeant. Still, we'll see. He sent the item to the coroner's clerk, who confirmed it as a common brand from a shop on the high street. Nothing special, except that this one had been repaired with care, the heel reattached by hand rather than machine. Sentimental repair, Purbright mused. People seldom mend things they've stopped loving. That afternoon, a small crowd gathered along the riverbank, their curiosity disguised as civic duty. Among them stood Mrs. Viblock, issuing moral commentary like a parish bell. "The river always gives back what doesn't belong," she said with relish. "Mark my words, they'll find her next." Purbright passed her with a nod and stationed himself near the water, watching the current carry slow flecks of silt. At 3:30, the dragline brought up a child's toy, a small wooden horse, one leg missing. Purbright crouched, turning it over. "Curious," he murmured. "This has been in the water far longer than 3 days." The constable frowned. "So she didn't drop it?" "No," Purbright said quietly. "But perhaps she saw it." Later, back at the station, Mrs. Renard arrived again, paler, tremulous. "Have you found her?" Purbright motioned for her to sit. "Not yet." "Only traces, objects that have learned to wait." She twisted her gloves. "I keep seeing her face. I can't be sure she meant to frighten me." Purbright studied her a moment before saying, "Guilt, Mrs. Renard, is like a mirror held too close. You see yourself until you no longer know who's looking back." After she left, Mally returned from the cobbler's shop with a receipt. "The shoe, sir. Repaired last week." "Paid for by someone called Lummis?" Purbright raised an eyebrow. "Our nervous curate again." "That's 2 acts of charity connected to one missing girl." He tapped the desk slowly. "And neither particularly holy." That evening the river swelled with new rain. Purbright walked its edge, coat collar up, the mist softening the lamps into halos. He paused where the shoe had been found. Something about the current's direction troubled him. The flow here moved slower, circling back toward town. If the girl had fallen in, her body would not have drifted away but lingered, hidden beneath the reeds, waiting for discovery on its own schedule. He stood there for a long while, listening to the slow voice of the water, thinking of a parcel wrapped in brown paper, a letter that never travelled, and a town where every kindness had a shadow. When he turned back toward the station, the first rumour of thunder rolled in the distance, promising a storm strong enough to uncover what civility had so carefully buried. The rain arrived at dawn, steady and thin, soaking Flaxborough into silence. Inspector Purbright, who preferred his thoughts undisturbed by weather, decided the morning called for information delivered in comfort. By 10:30, he was seated in the parlour of Mrs. Bundle, a widow of formidable hearing and unassailable opinion. Her tea was strong enough to stiffen wallpaper, and her knowledge of the town exceeded the archives. "I always said that river was sly," she began, pouring with precision. "It takes what it wants and returns it only when it's lost interest. Same with people, I suppose." Purbright smiled mildly. "An interesting theology, Mrs. Bundle, though I suspect human nature is the busier thief," she sniffed. "You're thinking of that poor sharp girl." "I told Mrs. Viblock at the co-op it wasn't murder. Not yet, anyhow. These young women, always writing letters they shouldn't, makes trouble for everyone, especially the men who can't read the fine print." Purbright stirred his tea, watching her without appearing to. "Letters? Yes. It's remarkable how many of them change meaning once they're found. You never heard her mention a Mrs. Renard?" Mrs. Bundle's eyes brightened, not from recognition, but from the prospect of confidential disclosure. "Ah, that's the travel man's wife, isn't it? Came to town once, very fine coat, looked at everyone as if we were unpaid bills. I saw her near the bridge a few days back, same evening, I think, waiting under her umbrella, though there wasn't proper rain yet. Gave me the impression she wasn't waiting for the weather to change." "Did you see her meet anyone?" Purbright asked, gently. "No, but when I passed again, she'd gone." "And there was a girl's scarf on the fence. Red." The sort that says, "Notice me," and then regrets it. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. I remember thinking whoever dropped that will want it back one way or another. Purbright set down his cup, satisfied.
You have a gift for remembering the incidental, Mrs. Bundle. It's often the incidental that runs away with the truth, she chuckled softly. And sometimes with the inspector too. You'll have your hands full before Sunday, mark me. As he left, the rain had eased into mist, and the streets wore that damp hush peculiar to towns pretending not to gossip. Purbright walked toward the station, his pace unhurried, his mind tracing the river's slow curve through the town. The curate's repairs, the landlady's handkerchief, the parcel, the missing girl, each now connected by something as thin, yet binding as the string once tied around that brown paper package. Inside his office, he found Mally reading a statement from the coroner's clerk. No sign of the body, sir, but the river level's rising. Setting a drag line again tomorrow. Purbright nodded, lighting his pipe.
Let them.
Water has its own timetable, Sergeant. We needn't rush to meet it. He blew out a thin ribbon of smoke that curled like the fog outside. Meanwhile, find out who sold red scarves in town last month. There can't have been many. Mally raised an eyebrow.
You think she dropped it on purpose?
Possibly, Purbright said, tapping ash into the tray. A message isn't always written in ink. Sometimes it's left hanging on a fence for whoever's supposed to understand it. He leaned back, the faintest trace of wry amusement softening his expression. And in Flaxborough, there's always someone who does. By Friday morning, the river had begun to recede, leaving behind a film of silt and the kind of silence that only follows a storm. Flaxborough, satisfied it had done enough worrying for 1 week, returned to its usual business of tidy judgment and subtle surveillance. Only Purbright seemed unhurried by the lull. He arrived at the station precisely on time, nodded to Mally and said, I believe we might try a little experiment in civility today. Mally looked wary. Civility, sir? Yes, Sergeant.
It's the most reliable form of interrogation.
No one guards themselves against politeness. By noon, Purbright had arranged a casual tea at the vicarage, ostensibly to thank Reverend Lummis for his assistance. The curate accepted eagerly, unaware that Mrs. Reynard and Mrs. Blennerhassett had also been invited. Flaxborough's social code ensured none of them could decline, however uneasy the prospect. The parlour was warm, the conversation not. Cups clinked, spoons trembled faintly. Purbright began with an air of genial inconsequence. Curious how rain clears the air, yet leaves so much mud behind, he said. Rather like misunderstanding, don't you think? Mrs. Blennerhassett murmured agreement, eyes darting to Mrs. Reynard, who sat rigid, gloved hands folded. Lummis attempted a smile, which collapsed quickly under its own strain. I understand, Reverend, Purbright continued smoothly, that you once arranged small collections for those in difficulty. A commendable service. Did Miss Sharp ever receive such help? Lummis flushed.
She was proud.
But yes, she accepted some aid, for rent once.
I only meant kindness. Kindness? Purbright said gently. It's often mistaken for permission. He let the remark hang, then turned to Mrs. Reynard.
And you, madam, were also kind enough to meet Miss Sharp by the river, though not, I think, for charitable reasons. Her teacup rattled faintly.
I told you everything, almost, he interrupted softly.
But not that you followed her letter with one of your own, delivered by hand. She tore it up, of course, though she kept the envelope. The stamp, foreign issue, quite rare for Flaxborough. Mrs. Reynard's lips parted, but no denial came. Purbright leaned back, his tone mild. You see, everyone here tried to help the girl, each in their own way. The Reverend offered sympathy, you offered warning, and Mrs. Blennerhassett offered gossip, disguised as protection. Yet somehow, between your combined virtues, Miss Sharp vanished. A low rumble of discomfort filled the room, more felt than heard. Lummis stood abruptly.
Inspector, if you're implying... I'm implying nothing, Reverend, Purbright said pleasantly.
only observing that guilt often travels by courtesy. People shake hands before they push. He rose, adjusting his coat. One final thing, the parcel Miss Sharp carried. It wasn't money or blackmail. It was a bundle of letters, yours, Mrs. Reynard. She intended to return them. What she didn't realize was that someone else was following her to ensure she did. The words settled like dust in sunlight.
No one moved.
Then Mrs. Reynard whispered, "You think my husband?" Purbright smiled faintly. "I think your husband's reputation has already done enough harm. As for the rest, the river will decide how much it's willing to reveal. It always does." He thanked them all with the same calm civility he'd begun with, excused himself, and stepped into the cool air outside. Behind him, he could almost feel the silence rearranging itself into speculation.
Mally waited by the gate.
"That was a bit cruel, sir." "Necessary," Purbright replied. "Flaxborough doesn't confess under pressure. It prefers embarrassment."
Now we wait.
"By tomorrow, one of them will come to us, eager to correct a detail they think we've misunderstood." He glanced up at the grey sky. "And that, Sergeant, is the courtesy trap. They step into it out of good manners." By the next afternoon, the mist had thinned into a faint, glassy stillness. Flaxborough looked polished by guilt, its cobbles glistening with a deceptive cleanliness. Inspector Purbright arrived at the vicarage once more, not for tea this time, but for conclusion. Reverend Lummis had sent word that he wished to clarify certain details, a phrase which in Purbright's experience usually meant confession disguised as clarification. The parlour fire burned too eagerly, filling the room with warmth that felt borrowed. Lummis stood by the mantel, pale and restless. "Inspector," he began, "I had no wish to deceive you."
I wanted to protect her." Purbright set his hat neatly upon a chair.
"Protection," he said quietly, "is a common form of destruction, Reverend. You'll find many crimes are only courtesy misapplied." Lummis drew a shuddering breath.
"It wasn't like that."
"I met her that night by the river. She wanted me to take the parcel to burn it. She said she couldn't face Mrs. Reynard again. I tried to dissuade her, told her confession was better than flight."
"Then she slipped, or—" His voice faltered.
"The bank was muddy. She fell. I swear I reached for her." "But the water—" Purbright waited through the silence that followed, as if giving the man's conscience time to fill the room.
"And the parcel?"
he asked softly. "I kept it.
"I couldn't destroy it."
I hid it under the church steps." His shoulders slumped.
"I thought it was mercy," Purbright nodded once.
"It rarely is."
"And you said nothing?"
"She was already gone."
"I told myself it would only make things worse." He looked up suddenly, eyes bright with a kind of weary relief.
"You understand, don't you? She wasn't wicked, just frightened." "I do," said Purbright. "And you, Reverend, were frightened of appearing less than virtuous. It's a local weakness." He rose and moved toward the window, where the faint glimmer of the river could be seen between leafless trees. "The coroner will call it accidental, which is charitable enough. But your silence allowed the town to invent a dozen cruelties in her place. That's your true sin, I'm afraid. Not the fall, but the silence that followed it." Lummis bowed his head. "Will you arrest me?" "For what?" Purbright said mildly. "Foolishness?"
"That would overcrowd the cells." He collected the parcel later from beneath the vicarage steps, a small, damp bundle of letters tied with the same piece of string that had once floated near the river bank.
Back at the station, he laid it on his desk, unopened. Mally entered quietly. "So it's done then?" "As much as Flaxborough allows anything to be done," Purbright replied. "Miss Sharp went to end a misunderstanding, not her life. The curate tried to save her reputation and lost his own in the process. And the rest of the town provided its usual chorus of speculation and tea." Mally looked uneasy. "Seems wrong, sir."
"No villain, no justice," Purbright smiled faintly. "There's justice enough, Sergeant."
"It just prefers modest lodgings. The river's had its say. The rest is paperwork." Outside, the church bells began to ring for evensong, their sound soft but clear through the cooling air. Purbright closed the file, slipped the parcel into an evidence drawer, and extinguished his pipe. You see, Mally, in Flaxborough, truth doesn't shout. It knocks politely and waits to be let in. He looked once more at the window where the last of the daylight trembled over the river. And sometimes, he added, almost to himself, it leaves its shoes by the door. Flaxborough recovered from tragedy in the same quiet, methodical way it managed everything else, by talking it into dullness. Within a week, Miss Sharp's name had drifted into the soft category of unfortunate matters, safely filed beside past scandals no longer convenient to recall. The river, once searched and whispered over, now reflected only clouds and the occasional passing duck. Respectability had resumed its rightful rule. At the Market Arms, conversation returned to council rates and the new bus timetable. Mrs. Viblock, who had confidently predicted a murder, now assured anyone listening that she had always said it would be an accident. The curate's sudden illness, an extended nervous rest in the country, was treated with kind restraint. "Poor man," said Miss Treadgold, "too good for this world." No one asked what he had been too good at. Inspector Purbright, meanwhile, sat in his office reviewing a week's worth of unremarkable reports. The sound of the clock filled the space where speculation used to live. Sergeant Mally came in with 2 cups of tea and a small note from the coroner. "Verdict, accidental death," he said. "As you predicted, sir," Purbright nodded. "It's satisfying to be confirmed by procedure, though it seldom improves the truth." He sipped his tea thoughtfully. "I sometimes wonder, Sergeant, if Flaxborough doesn't rather prefer its mysteries unsolved. They keep conversation lively without disturbing sleep." Mally smiled faintly. "And now, I suppose, we'll go back to parking complaints and missing bicycles." "Ah, yes," Purbright said, setting down his cup. "The solid furniture of law enforcement. Still, there's value in the small things. Keeps us from mistaking drama for duty." He opened his drawer, where the bundle of letters from the vicarage lay, now properly sealed in brown paper and tagged for storage. "Do you know what I like best about this town, Sergeant? It behaves as though conscience were just another form to be filed in triplicate." That afternoon, he took a slow walk through the square. The shops gleamed, the postmistress nodded briskly, and somewhere nearby a piano lesson stumbled through a hymn. Outside the library, the notice board still displayed the missing persons poster for Enid Sharp, corners curling but still clinging. Purbright paused, removed it carefully, and folded it once before slipping it into his coat pocket. As he passed the river bridge, the water moved lazily under the arch, brown and opaque, but oddly peaceful. A child leaned over the railing, tossing crumbs to the ducks. "They always come back," the boy said, with cheerful certainty. Purbright smiled. "Yes," he replied softly. "Sooner or later." Evening settled over the town, the lamps flickering to life one by one. From somewhere distant came the faint toll of church bells, steady, unhurried, confident that life in Flaxborough would continue exactly as it always had, politely, predictably, and entirely unaware of its own strangeness. Back at the station, Purbright wrote his closing note for the file. Subject deceased by misadventure. No evidence of foul play. Public interest concluded. He signed it neatly, replaced his pen, and leaned back, listening to the rain beginning again on the window pane. For a moment, his gaze lingered on the empty chair opposite his desk. Then he reached for another file, this one labeled Planning Committee Irregularities, and opened it with the calm assurance of a man who knew that even in a town as tidy as Flaxborough, there would always be something quietly untidy waiting beneath the surface.